Carrie, here is your reminder. Go to the doctor tomorrow.
Alexa, stop.
Carrie.
That was some timing right there, wasn't it? Hi, Dada Veda, welcome. How are you this morning? I'd like to give folks a chance to join. There's TBC. How are you, TBC? I wanted to wear the sweater, but I'm actually a little too warm for it right now. So, I can always put it back on if I get chilly. So we're on chapter 6 of Dada Veda's spiritual memoir, From Brooklyn to Benares and Back. Oh, you're eating lunch at school and you gotta head to your computer class in a bit. Well, thanks for popping in, TBC. Don't get in trouble at school. There's December. Welcome, December. Hope you had a good birthday yesterday. If you can't tell, I'm still kind of waking up. Had a bit of a late night. Oh my. You know what they say about those things, don't you, TBC? Probably not the appropriate place to mention it, so I'll share that little joke with you later, TBC. Not appropriate conversation for a spiritual memoir. So we got TBC, we got Dada Veda. Who else is here? It says there's 3. We got December. December, TBC, Dada Veda. Anybody else? Hi, Julie. Yeah, we played lots of Fortnite last night. It was super fun. It's a new chapter and a new season. And it was super fun. And there's Archangel Miraliel. Welcome. Just in time for chapter 6 of Dada Veda's spiritual memoir, From Brooklyn to Benares and Back. December's not feeling so good, but well enough to be read to. Well, that's good, because I'm going to read to you. Shall we get started? Maybe one more sip of coffee. Jasper's getting a drink right behind me. Archangel Miraliel, where are you from? I'm not familiar with you. I'm Kris Pride. I'm in Michigan, USA. Oh, cool, Julie. All right, let's get started. Chapter 6. What you doing back there, Jasper? All right. The Far East and Back. On September 18th, 1982, I departed from France and headed to the Far East, or what Ananda Marga calls Hong Kong sector. I had been in France for more than 5 years, and in that time I had given countless lectures in every part of the country. During that period, I had also given personal lessons in meditation to over 700 people. Actually, I had been designated for transfer to Hong Kong sector almost 2 years earlier, but the transfer was not completed because I was not sent a ticket, nor was a replacement sent to take over my activities in France. To be honest, in 1980, I didn't want to leave France because I was just getting started there, so I didn't make any extraordinary effort to go to my new post. However, by 1982, I was quite happy to leave and take on a new challenge. Hong Kong sector comprises China, the eastern part of the then Soviet Union, from the Urals to the Pacific, Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Korea. At the time, we did not have any activities in the communist parts of the sector, and our main offices were in Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, and Korea. My first stop was in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a bustling metropolis, one of the most densely populated cities of the world. It has a tropical climate, and when I got there, it was hot and humid. I had to take a cold bath 4 times a day in order to feel comfortable. Our Ananda Marga Center at that time was in an apartment in downtown Hong Kong, and from the windows of the apartment you could hear the constant noise of ongoing construction, complete with swinging cranes and deafening jackhammers. The heat and the noise were unbearable, and I thought, if I can't do meditation here, then what about the people who might become my students? While I was in Hong Kong, I connected with a young Chinese man whom I had initiated in Orleans. I also was a guest at some yoga classes taught by one of the Margis, but otherwise I was not able to do much in my short time there. Yeah, Julie, Jasper does want to be heard. He sure does. Oh! Dada Veda, I forgot. I missed a chapter. I missed a paragraph from one of the previous chapters last week. So perhaps I should stop and do that. And now I don't even know which chapter it was. Could you help me out, Dada Veda? Do you know which page it was, which chapter it was, so that I can... Or should we just skip it? I forgot all about it until just now. Do you remember which one it was? Okay. After a few weeks, I went on to Taipei, which was the headquarters of Ananda Marga in the Far East. There were a lot of Margis in Taipei and also in other cities of Taiwan. They enjoyed coming to our centers whenever they could, and the Jagradis were alive with energy. I gave some lectures in Taipei and initiated some young men into meditation practice. I also had a chance to visit Ananda Marga centers in Hsinchu and Kaohsiung. When I reached Hong Kong sector, my posting was the sectorial PCAP secretary. PCAP is an acronym that stands for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and Plants. You can say that it is the ecological section of Ananda Marga. Once I knew what my new designation was, I got busy and put together a newsletter for the PCAP department. The feature article was about tropical forest destruction. I sent it to the PCAP secretary in India, and he was really pleased with it. I would have been happy to be the PCAP secretary in the Far East, but the head monk of the sector wanted me to become the sectorial office secretary in our headquarters in Taipei. The term office secretary doesn't sound like much, but it is a key administrative position. The secretary has to maintain communication with the monks and nuns and lay members of Ananda Marga, send reports to India, and also do the financial accounts. A few weeks after I set up my office in Taipei, a new sectorial secretary was posted, and he wanted us to move the office to Japan in order to enhance Ananda Marga's presence there. Soon I was on my way to Japan. Unlike Taiwan, in Japan there were not a lot of Margis. There were a lot of monks and a few nuns, but very few Margis. The lack of dedicated lay members caused a lot of material problems for the monks and nuns who were working in Japan. There were no donations, and in order to sustain themselves, they set up yoga classes and also tried begging door to door in the style of Japanese Buddhist monks. When I reached Japan in January 1983, they had discovered a new income stream. One of the monks met a French expatriate living in Tokyo and taught him meditation. This Frenchman was importing cheap oil paintings from Hong Kong and selling them in the subway station corridors. He would set them up on easels and sell them to Japanese businessmen, especially in the evening when the businessmen would stagger home after a long day of work and a few hours of drinking. The inebriated businessmen were flush with cash, and it was possible to sell some of the paintings for 10 times their import price. Our enterprising Dada got his very own stock of paintings and went out to the subway stations with great success. Soon I joined him, along with a few other colleagues. 6 evenings a week we went out to sell oil paintings. With a secure income, we could think about renting a proper apartment for our activities. I went around Tokyo with one Dada who was fluent in Japanese, and we found an apartment located on the 10th floor of a modern building in the Honancho section of Tokyo. The apartment was perfectly laid out for our activities. Just inside the entrance corridor to the right was a small room that we chose to be our office area. The biggest room was long and spacious with tatami mats made out of bamboo. There was also another small room with tatami mats. During the night, we rolled out our sleeping bags, and during the day, they were neatly tucked away in closets. The whole apartment, especially the main room, had a nice, peaceful look, perfect for yoga and meditation and vegetarian dinners. We just had to figure out how to attract people to the premises. We continued selling paintings in the evenings and had more than enough money to pay our rent and purchase proper food. But our financial goals were more ambitious than that. We decided to pool our funds so that we could purchase some land in Japan. We went to a local bank to set up an account, and I told the bank manager we are going to deposit 30 million yen in this account. We eventually reached our target and bought land near Narita Airport just outside of Tokyo, though I was no longer in Japan when this happened. Oh, TBC gets to stick around. That's cool. Concerts in the Tokyo Jagrati. Having a spacious office in Tokyo offered us an opportunity to host some interesting programs, as well as providing us with a base from which we could raise money for our land project. Now it was just a question of finding programs that would be attractive to the Japanese. When I was in Europe, I had heard of full moon festivals that some marquis had organized. Musicians and artists would perform, and the guests enjoyed vegetarian refreshments and socialized after the performances. These programs were usually held in the intimate settings of our yoga centers rather than in large rented concert halls. I wanted to try something like this in Tokyo in our new apartment. I was starting from scratch, so the first musicians that I was able to enlist were Dada Vibhuti Bhushan and me. Dada Vibhuti Bhushan was Italian, and he could do a rousing rendition of the Italian folk song Bella Ciao. I could play some simple spiritual songs on the guitar and get people to sing along. So I announced that we would be having a Rawa evening. Rawa is an acronym for the Renaissance Artists and Writers Association. It is a department of Ananda Marga set up by Baba in 1958. The purpose of Rawa is to encourage artistic expression that raises spiritual and social consciousness and to free art from the shackles of political and commercial interests. Rawa activities include providing opportunities for artists to express themselves in specially arranged concerts, organizing artist cooperatives, and recording and publishing material created in the spirit of art for service and blessedness. We didn't have a big network of contacts and friends to begin with, but I went ahead anyway and told the other monks and nuns in Tokyo about it and asked them to invite guests to our first evening concert. Predictably, only a few people came to that first Rawa evening, but I was persistent. I organized another evening a few weeks later, and some more people came. But still, my colleagues didn't take this enterprise very seriously. Then I found a way to advertise our programs to an interested audience. There were some English language newspapers in Tokyo. The Japan Times was one of them. They had a free classified advertising section, and I announced the next Rawa program in that newspaper. The newspaper was not only read by foreign English speakers, but by Japanese people who wanted to improve their English language skills and try new things. This was just perfect for us. The advertisements in the Japan Times brought some new faces to our Rawa programs, and now all of my colleagues became enthusiastic. Dada Satyaparananda in particular jumped into action. He started cooking sumptuous Indian vegetarian meals that were served at the conclusion of the music portion of the program, and also gave short talks about meditation, which were included as part of the program. Sounds wonderful. Now we had a basic formula that worked. We would advertise the programs in the newspaper, and when people arrived, they would become part of our mailing list. I would begin the program with a short introduction to Rawa and our concept of art. Then the various presenters would sing, recite poems, play musical instruments, and sometimes present works of visual art. Increasingly, the artists were not members of Ananda Marga. Somewhere in the middle of the program, Dada S. would give his short talk, and at the end, everyone sat around our tablecloths, spread out on the tatami mats, and enjoyed a meal. With our full moon festivals, we were able to make a lot of new friends, and many of them learned meditation from us. The number of participants in our weekly meditation sessions began to grow, and when I was about to leave Tokyo in May of 1984, I counted more than 30 people at one of the Sunday meditation sessions. After I left Tokyo, the Rawa evenings continued to grow. Jasper's wagging his little nubbin at us. Becoming an Avadhuta. In March of 1983, I was called to India to become an Avadhuta. This was a big thing. In my previous visits to India, I had tried to become an Avadhuta without success. Now, instead of me clamoring to get the initiation, India was calling me. I flew to Bangladesh on the national airline of that small country. When the plane landed in Dhaka, everyone on the plane started clapping. I'd never experienced anything like this before and wondered if the plane was so unsafe that the people had let out an exclamation of relief on landing. Later, as I traveled around the world, I found that in many developing countries, this is normal at the end of a flight. Once again, due to the Indian blacklist, I was not able to get an Indian visa prior to my visit. I was hoping that I could find some way to cross over the border without having to pass through a normal checkpoint. I took a bus from Dhaka to the border and arrived in a small town. I wandered around it and first tried to cross by myself, but was unsuccessful. Then I went back to the town and eventually found some people who could take me across the border. This delayed my scheduled arrival in Calcutta, but it worked. They took me into the forest, where we waited in a small hamlet consisting of a few mud houses. Later, they took me out again, and I walked a short distance till I reached a road on the Indian side of the border. All of a sudden, a bicycle rickshaw appeared on the road and told me to get in. He handed me a note written by a Margi and then took me to the home of that Margi, who ran an Ananda Marga school. I was amazed by this. I had wandered across the border with no idea of where I was or where I was going, and all of a sudden I was being taken to the home of a Margi. Later, I asked that Margi how he knew I was coming and how everything had been arranged. All he said was, "A rickshaw driver told me." From there, I boarded a train for Calcutta. After my arrival, I was walking on the street when someone hit me in the back with a water balloon filled with colored water. It was the full moon of March, the day when the Indian color festival, Holi, is celebrated. Throwing colored powder and sometimes colored water at people is part of the festival. I didn't know what was going on at the time, however. I just wanted to get to Baba's house as soon as possible. When I reached Baba's residence at Lake Gardens, the person in charge of arranging the Avadhuta initiation saw me and seemed relieved that I had finally arrived. He embraced me and said that Baba had inexplicably delayed giving the initiations till now. I waited with the other monks who were selected for this initiation, and finally we went into a room where Baba taught us Kapalika meditation. Kapalika means the one who protects the created universe. It is a special meditation that tantric adepts perform once a month at the time of the new moon. The meditation is practiced outdoors in a cremation grounds, cemetery, or a lonely place, and one of its goals is to overcome fear, shyness, shame, and other mental propensities. This meditation dates back to the time of Shiva, approximately 5000 BCE. While Baba was explaining the process, he demonstrated something using his hand and then quipped, "Did they have hands 7,000 years ago?" One moment, please. Carrie, I think you accidentally hit a button because it says Carrie is Moonrock Fairy enabled subscribers only mode for this channel. Can you unenable that?
Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. Hi, Taff. Welcome. How are you? When the instruction was completed, I took an oath and was given a new name. I was now Veda Prajanananda Avaduta. Veda means knowledge, and Prajna, pronounced Pragya, literally means perfect knowing or perfect knowledge, and it is commonly understood as wisdom. So the name Veda Prajanananda can be translated as the one who attains bliss, Ananda, through knowledge and wisdom. I now adopted the full orange dress, whereas before I wore an orange gown and white trousers. Following my initiation as an Avaduta, I returned to Japan and continued my work there. On the road in Japan. While I was in Tokyo, I missed the adventures I used to have in France. In France, I rarely stayed in my office and would spend most of the month touring various cities. That's why I jumped at a chance to get out of Tokyo to visit Margie's and other places. We had some contacts in the city of Sapporo, which is on the northern island of Hokkaido, and I arranged a visit there, deciding to travel by a combination of hitchhiking, bullet train, and boat. On the way, I also planned to stop in the homes of some people who were interested in learning meditation. When I had started touring in France 5 years earlier, one of the first things that I did was learn a few French words and phrases. Specifically, I learned the necessary vocabulary for teaching the basic meditation lesson. I did this by getting my French friends to make a small booklet that contained the meditation lesson instructions. Based on that experience, I asked the Dada, who was fluent in Japanese, to prepare a booklet for me with the basic vocabulary I would need. When it was done, I studied it and put it into my backpack. As per the plan, I started off the trip by hitching a ride on the roads outside Tokyo. At one point, I also got on a train and continued north. Before I reached the northern limit of Honshu Island, the main island on which Tokyo is located, I decided to visit a place where I had the address of a boy who had expressed interest in learning meditation. Despite the great difficulty caused by my limited Japanese vocabulary, I was able to locate the house. As was the case with some of my early experiences in France, neither of us was very proficient in the other's language. Somehow we managed to communicate, and with the help of my booklet, I taught him meditation. I'm not sure how much he really absorbed, but between this teaching experience and the effort to find the way to his home, my ability to converse in Japanese was growing. After this short visit, I continued on my way and soon reached the northern port city of Aomori, where there was an overnight ferry to Hokkaido. I boarded the ferry and arrived in the port across the strait early in the morning around 5 a.m. There was no train connection to Sapporo for several hours, and as I sat in the terminal building, I was wondering what to do, asking Baba to help me utilize the time for something worthwhile. As I was thinking this, one of the workers in the terminal came over and asked me what I was doing. He thought I looked a little lost and asked if he should call the police to help me out. I said no, and then told him that I was a yoga teacher. Then he thumbed through a directory and made a phone call. I was skeptical, doubting that anything would come of it so early in the morning, but after he finished his call, he came over to me and told me that someone would be coming to pick me up. It turned out to be a woman yoga teacher. Her husband was a doctor who ran a small clinic attached to the residence. The woman, who was very well off and able to spend a lot of her time teaching yoga, kept me busy from morning to night. I taught at some of her yoga classes, introduced the Baba Nam Kevalam mantra for chanting and meditation, and between yoga classes, groups of young Japanese students came by to converse with me in the hope of improving their English language skills. At one point, a newspaper crew came and interviewed me and later did a story about my visit. I had mentally asked Baba to make my short stay in the city of Hakodate worthwhile, and he more than fulfilled my request. The next day, I headed on to Sapporo, where I met some Margies and held a group meditation session with them. Sapporo was covered with snow, and I saw remnants of the ice sculptures that had been made for a famous annual winter festival in the city. After my visit to Sapporo, I went back to Tokyo, feeling that with a few more trips like that, I would really be able to learn Japanese. Back to Europe. Just as I was starting to get adjusted to Japan and beginning to learn Japanese, however, I received word that I had been transferred again. I was being sent back to Europe to serve as the sectorial office secretary for Berlin sector. I had already served as the regional secretary in France, but now I was to work in the office that coordinated Ananda Marga work throughout Europe. I was not so enthusiastic about the transfer because in Tokyo, we really had a great esprit de corps. Selling paintings in the evening was hard, but we were all doing it together for a common cause. The Rawa programs were inspiring, and so we're starting to teach meditation to more and more people in Japan. So I didn't hurry back to Europe and instead continued to work in Tokyo for a few months more. Our Ananda Marga office in Europe was located in the city of Mainz. Finally, in May of 1984, the pressure to reach there became too much to resist, and I boarded the long flight from Tokyo to Frankfurt. Although Baba had designated Berlin as the headquarters for Ananda Marga in Europe, we found it easier to work in this medium-sized city near Frankfurt. One of the reasons for this was that West Berlin at the time was an island in the middle of communist East Germany. To get there, you had to drive slowly through East Germany on a heavily guarded road. It was kind of creepy and also inconvenient because at that time, most Ananda Marga work was taking place in Western Europe. My job in Mainz was much more difficult than my job in Tokyo because Ananda Marga was active in more countries in Berlin sector and the administrative work was more complex. The finances were more complicated as well. We had a huge office and a lot of bills to pay, but we did not have a fixed or steady income. At one point, I even decided to import some paintings from Hong Kong and went to some flea markets to sell them. I was working in Mainz for about a year when one day the monk in charge of the sector came back from India and informed us that we had to move our office to Berlin. He explained that during the meeting in India that he had just attended, some of the monks working in Africa had tried to get permission to move their office from Nairobi to a city in Zambia. Baba explained that he had chosen the sectorial headquarters with careful deliberation and they shouldn't be changed. The location of our office in Europe had already been changed several years back, but our sectorial secretary wanted to correct the change. You have to go to Berlin, computer and all, he told me. So I packed up as much office equipment as I could and moved the office to West Berlin, to an apartment that we were renting at the local headquarters. I moved, but the office really didn't move because Berlin was still inconveniently located in the middle of East Germany. When people had to travel to India or other places in the sector, the nearby Frankfurt airport made Mainz the logical choice rather than Berlin. When we called monks and nuns for the bi-monthly reporting sessions, Mainz was also more convenient, both for ease of travel and because we had a much larger building there. As a result, I had to commute often between Mainz in West Germany and Berlin in East Germany. Berlin and the Iron Curtain. The atmosphere in Berlin was quite different than that of West Germany. There was more evidence of avant-garde, radical, and punk culture. West Berlin was a varied, lively, and cosmopolitan city. One day I was out walking when all of a sudden I came upon a white wall covered with all kinds of colorful paintings, murals, and graffiti. It turned out to be the fearsome Berlin Wall that the communists had erected in 1961, dividing the two parts of Berlin in order to keep their population from fleeing to West Germany. I was curious to know what lay on the other side of that wall, especially knowing that Baba had instructed us to spread our ideas in Eastern Europe. It was possible to visit East Berlin, but it was an intimidating experience. You had to go to one of the designated crossing points. The most famous one was Checkpoint Charlie, home to a well-known museum commemorating the attempts by East German citizens to cross the walls and barbed wire to seek asylum in West Germany. One Saturday afternoon, I went to one of the crossing points. I had to pass a number of officers who checked my passport with great attention. They had a machine that emanated a spooky blue light in which they put the passport. They also searched my pockets for leaflets or other contraband. I then had to change some hard currency, dollars or West German marks, for their East German currency before I was able to walk through the gates into East Berlin. Although I was only a few hundred feet away from West Berlin, it seemed like I had passed into another world. After that, I visited East Berlin a number of times. Sometimes I went to coffee shops in the main shopping plaza at Alexanderplatz. In the middle of this busy plaza was a giant tower that served as the main transmitting antenna for East German television. The observation deck and restaurant near the top of the structure was also one of East Berlin's biggest tourist attractions. In the coffee shops around the tower, I met young people and told them about yoga and meditation, but I did not have much chance to do anything more. One time in East Berlin, I attended the Festival of Political Song, where I saw an American troupe called the Bread and Puppet Theater perform. The festival was held in a large convention center, and during an intermission period, I sat in the lobby of the building and tried to do my midday meditation. One of the guards came up to me and nudged me with his stick. I guess meditation was not permitted there. I was wearing civil dress rather than my orange robes, but it seemed that meditating in public was not allowed in East Berlin. I also used to cross in and out of East Germany on my commutes from Mainz to Berlin. Cars from West Germany would have to go to a large border area where the documents of both the car and passengers were checked under the high-tech East German fluorescent blue light boxes. Then the cars would travel slowly, 60 miles per hour was the top speed allowed, on a carefully watched highway with surveillance towers scattered all along the route. Between the border station with its long wait and document check and the tedious drive along the East German highway, it was quite a hassle. I didn't own a car, but I used to travel with rideshare services. One time in 1986 or 87, I was in a car crossing East Germany on my way to West Berlin when I startled the owner by telling him that in our lifetime, the Berlin Wall and this East German border would come down. He didn't believe me, of course, but my prediction came true a few short years later. I was not clairvoyant, but I had come to this conclusion due to a general belief that was widespread in Ananda Marga. In 1955, Baba had reassured some disciples, telling them that he would be around for another 50 years and that during this period, the mission of establishing a world where spiritual values were honored would be completed. So I thought that by 2005, a lot of the major problems of the world would be solved, and communism was certainly one of these problems. In his book, Human Society, Baba also mentioned that the military rule of the communists had been challenged prematurely by intellectuals in Hungary in 1956 and would again be challenged afterwards. I really believed that this would happen, but thought that it would be after the year 2000. I was just as surprised as anyone else when communism in Eastern Europe began to collapse at the end of 1989, and in the years that followed, I was able to visit all of the former communist countries of Eastern Europe. Whirlwind tour in Poland. Even before communism collapsed, we started to do some amazing work in Eastern Europe. One of the most active places for Ananda Marga in the late 1980s was Poland. Poland was a staunch Catholic country, and it was not possible for the communists to stamp out religion or spirituality there. While Lech Walesa was leading the Solidarity labor movement against the communist government, the young people of Poland took a keen interest in many forms of Eastern spirituality. Teachers of all types were active in Poland: Zen, Hare Krishna, and of course Ananda Marga. We were allowed to work without much official obstruction, and some people even speculated that the communist government tolerated this New Age spirituality as a way to counter the influence of the Catholic Church, which they saw as one of their biggest enemies. Whatever the explanation, in the late 1980s, Poland was a great place to teach meditation. I began visiting Poland in 1987, and Ananda Marga already had a large following with centers in several cities. Some of the Margis organized an action-packed tour of several cities. I didn't have a chance to rest for even a single minute. Even while walking in the Warsaw train station, Margis came from nowhere to ask me to give them a spiritual name or answer questions about meditation. I was dressed in civil clothes during my travel around Poland, but would change into my orange uniform at the site of my lectures and other programs. The Margis who met me unexpectedly in the train station recognized me because I was walking with other meditators whom they knew well. The Warsaw train station was big and bustling. With its high ceilings, large lobby area, and busy food and magazine vendors, it was not much different from the stations I had seen in other parts of Europe. The trains were also laid out similarly to the ones in Western Europe, but the equipment was old, in sharp contrast to the train systems of France and Germany, where it seemed like new carriages were introduced on a yearly basis. My tour took me to Warsaw, Chojno, Wrocław, and Katowice, and I gave many lectures. The organization of some of these lectures was quite interesting. The Margis arranged a room in a university and put up some posters only a few hours before the event, yet even so there was a full house. The thirst for new things was amazing. From such a short and rapid tour, I could not tell if there was much difference between the students in Poland and their Western counterparts, though when I later went on to a slower-paced tour in Hungary, I did observe one important difference. We cheered when we heard that the Americans had bombed Hanoi, one man who had been a student in the 1960s told me, in Budapest in 1990. I didn't tell him that many students in the U.S. were not so happy about this event. During that week-long tour in Poland, I gave personal instruction in meditation to more than 100 people. In one instance, I was giving a lecture to a packed audience, many of whom wanted to learn meditation, but I couldn't finish the lecture and teach the people meditation because I had to leave for an event in another city. Luckily, a nun was traveling with us, and she was able to finish the lecture and at least teach meditation to the women in the audience. This tour of Poland and other visits in the period just before the fall of the communists paved the way for Ananda Marga's purchase of large rural centers in 1990 and afterwards. And the winner is... During the late 1980s, I also spent a lot of time in Scandinavia. In fact, when I wasn't in Poland or in Germany, I was either in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, or Finland. By this time, Scandinavia and all of Western Europe had slowed down with regard to the acceptance of Ananda Marga. The late 70s and first part of the 80s were indeed the glory days, with many young people flocking to Ananda Marga, learning meditation, and joining the ranks of full-time volunteers. As the novelty of Eastern mysticism wore off, it became more difficult to draw people to our programs. Other factors may have also played a role, such as the changing political and economic climate in Europe and the world, but it is hard to pin it down to one specific thing. Despite the slowdown, there were active Ananda Marga units in the major cities such as Oslo, Copenhagen, Stockholm, and Helsinki, and I visited all of these places. An interesting Ananda Marga center was set up near the medium-sized Swedish city of Örebro. Although the city dates back to the Middle Ages, its well-kept buildings and state-of-the-art infrastructure made it look as modern as could be. In an agricultural area just outside the city, Margis from Norway and Sweden purchased a large country house that they divided into several apartments, setting up a housing cooperative and spiritual community, complete with a meditation hall and a small kindergarten. The Ananda Marga lifestyle tends to attract similar people in the different countries I visited, and so I felt at home wherever I went. The cultures and languages of Sweden and Norway are particularly close, and if you didn't know the people, it would be hard to tell who was from which country. One time I watched as a Norwegian friend spoke with a Swede. Afterward, I asked him which language he was speaking. He was speaking Swedish, and I answered him in Norwegian, he told me. The people often invited me for retreats, and I enjoyed their warm company. One time during a retreat in Örebro, we held a Tandava competition, and I was one of the judges. Tandava is a strenuous dance. I had heard that when Baba first introduced it. He personally danced it for 17 minutes. We used to determine the winners based on both their form and their stamina. About 10 men took part in the Örebro competition. It doesn't last too long since it's really hard to keep jumping and raising your legs while keeping your arms extended horizontally. I watched them jump until only 2 were left, watching closely to see who kept the proper form. When the dancing stopped, I was ready to declare one the winner and the other the runner-up when someone pointed to the back of the room. Still standing was Pavan, an 8-year-old boy who had kept pace with the grown-ups. I was not sure what to do since I had not even seen the little boy dancing in the back, so I declared all 3 the winners. Jasper, kitty, kitty, kitty. Visiting India in the 1980s, various incidents. My life in Europe in this period was punctuated with yearly trips to India, ostensibly to give reports to Baba. These meetings no doubt had significance to our organization because they enabled Ananda Marga to grow and develop around the world in a uniform way. But I also believe that they had more than just an organizational significance since they enabled us to be close to Baba. These were intimate experiences, normally around 20 or 30 acharyas and Baba. During the New Year and in June, when Ananda Marga held its biannual big gatherings, the number of monks and nuns in these meetings would get much larger. I was fortunate to be in some of the smaller meetings where I got a chance to see the various sides of Baba. Baba the stern administrator, Baba the humorist, Baba the walking encyclopedia. One time I was in a meeting with some acharyas. Baba was taking a report from Dada Pranavananda, who was the publications secretary at that time. The deadline for printing one of Baba's books had come, and Baba wanted to know if the book was ready. He questioned Dada P, and Dada became uneasy because the book was not ready, and Baba seemed to be in a fierce mood. Baba asked Dada if he had indeed declared that the book would be ready today. Dada squirmed and then said that the target date that he had declared was actually a slip of the tongue or slip of the pen, and that it wasn't really supposed to be ready now. He braced himself for a rebuke from Baba, who usually didn't like to hear excuses. But instead of a rebuke, Baba started to tell a story. Once there was a lawyer, he said, who had a reputation for efficiency and punctuality. However, this lawyer missed an important date in court, failing to show up to represent his client. When he finally showed up in the courtroom a few days later, the judge questioned him about his absence. I could not reach the court on that day, the lawyer explained, because there was a plague in my village. The judge was puzzled by the lawyer's reply and then said out loud, Plague? Do you mean plague? The lawyer said, Yes, that is what I meant. The judge was still puzzled and said, Sir, you are a learned lawyer and well-versed in English, the language used in the courts of India. How could you make the mistake of pronouncing plague as plague? Excuse me, Your Honor, the lawyer replied. It was a slip of the tongue. The Walking Encyclopedia. When Baba was a youth, and later when he started working in the accounts office of the Indian Railways in Jamalpur, he was known as a walking encyclopedia. He seemed to know everything about any subject from botany to physics to human history. In addition to spiritual subjects, the books that Baba wrote as an adult include essays on linguistics, history, science, medicine, botany, political science, philosophy, psychology, and many other subjects. As acharyas working in close proximity to Baba, we were often treated to displays of his knowledge in these fields. On one of my yearly visits to India during the 1980s, there was a reporting session where Baba's encyclopedic knowledge was put on display. At that time, Baba was taking reports from district secretaries from around the world. The various monks and nuns had the task of bringing the district secretaries to the meetings in Calcutta. During one evening session, a young woman representing the Jakarta district of Indonesia stepped forward. Baba asked her which district she represented. When she said Jakarta, Baba explained the meaning of the name. He pointed out that the word Jakarta was originally Sanskrit, Sanskrit being spoken throughout large portions of South Asia in ancient times, and that it was derived from the words Jaya and Karta, which together mean victory to the Lord. Baba then asked her a long series of questions about the geography of her district, beginning with, is it in a volcanic belt? The girl was unable to answer the questions, but each time Baba himself supplied the answers, telling about the geography, climate, flora, and fauna of the area. I don't remember all the questions and answers, but I do remember that it was a dazzling display of knowledge. When Baba was leaving the hall, he stopped and turned to the General Secretary. G.S. Dada, he said, and you thought that your Baba didn't know anything about geography. On another occasion, I had the good fortune to be standing before Baba and answering or attempting to answer his questions. I say good fortune because I wanted Baba's attention, even if it meant getting scolded for a deficient report or getting called out for conduct that was not up to the mark. I wanted to get his guidance, either harsh or sweet. This time it was sweet. During the 1980s, Baba wrote a book on English grammar, and he also coined new words in Sanskrit as well. Whenever he issued new material, he liked to test the acharyas and margis who came before him in reporting sessions to see if they were up to date with his newest writings. During one evening meeting in Lake Gardens, Baba called on me to answer some questions. First he asked me, what is the proper Sanskrit term for television? Of course, there were no televisions around when Sanskrit was a living language, so a new term had to be invented for the modern era. The Indian government coined the term Doordarshan, which combines two Sanskrit words that together mean far-seeing. Baba was not satisfied with the term because in television there is not only seeing but hearing as well, so he coined a new term, Shitaka, which means seeing and hearing. I had heard about this, but when Baba questioned me, all I could remember was Doordarshan. Then he started to ask about some English words. He asked me, what is the meaning of drought? This is a tricky word. It can be pronounced like draft, and one meaning of it is to take a drink of water or other liquid. Baba helped me get the answer by making a movement with his hand as if he was drinking some water. Beer stored in kegs is often called drought beer or draft beer. It is possibly for this reason that the next question was, what does dry movement mean? Baba had explained this in his book on grammar. I remembered his explanation and said that it referred to movements to prohibit the manufacture, sale, and consumption of alcoholic beverages. Baba said that my answer was correct. Then he started to tell an anecdote about the leader of a dry movement who gave a long speech about the evils of alcohol and then went home and celebrated his successful speech with an alcoholic drink. Baba once again brought his hand near his mouth, mimicking the movement of a drinker, and everyone laughed. The next question got into more serious matters. The word was drought. Baba asked me, what are the causes of droughts? I only knew part of the answer. I said that excessive deforestation changes climates and can bring diminished rainfall and drought. Baba said that this was correct and then gave two more reasons. He said that the changing positions of low-pressure centers located in the oceans off continents is the second cause. And the third one is changes in the angular positions in relation to the Earth of certain stars and other celestial bodies. He said that at present, humans only had control over the first cause of drought, but in the future, advances in meteorological and marine sciences will allow humans to be able to do something about the second cause. Regarding the angular positions of celestial bodies, he said this was only in the jurisdiction of the Supreme Consciousness. After he said this, I sat down, thoroughly satisfied with the session. Later, the information that he gave on the causes of drought in that reporting session were incorporated in a formal essay called Water Conservation, published on March 25th, 1989. The Terrifying World Review. In 1985, we received word that Baba was conducting a world review. This was something new and unique, and I was required to go to India to take part in it. Normally each month, representatives from different parts of the world came to India and gave the reports in front of Baba and the central administration. But now Baba was calling batches of whole-time workers, monks and nuns, to come to India so that he could review their work. The batches were arranged according to particular work designations. For example, at that time, I was the office secretary for Berlin sector, so I had to present myself in front of Baba along with all the other office secretaries from around the world. It was still impossible for known Margis to get visas to India, so I bought a ticket to Bangladesh and traveled by land to Calcutta. The World Review meetings took place at Baba's house in Lake Gardens. Baba was in a very strict mood, and he was not at all satisfied with anyone's work. Finally, he told all of us, the 7 or 8 office secretaries from around the world, that we were no longer monks and we should leave his house immediately. As shocking as it sounded, it was routine for the World Review. The same thing had already happened to other batches of monks that had given their reports to Baba. The central level monks gave us instructions. We were to leave Baba's house and change into civil dress. Then we were to wait across the street from the house. At the proper time, we could then make an appeal to Baba to reconsider our status. So we went across the street and watched Baba's comings and goings and the other events taking place in the front courtyard of the house. I was sure Baba wasn't so disgusted with us that he never wanted to see us again, and this was confirmed after a day or two. It was Sunday, time for the weekly Dharma Chakra collective meditation. The weekly collective meditation is the most important social and spiritual function in Ananda Marga. Members are supposed to meditate twice a day, and once a week they should attend collective meditation. So that Sunday, we defrocked and expelled office secretaries, requested that we be allowed to attend the collective meditation program that afternoon. The request was sent to Baba, and after some deliberation, he said, "They have performed yeoman service for humanity. Let them attend." The word yeoman in this context means one who performs great and loyal service. So really, in Baba's eyes, we were not such bad fellows after all. A few days later, as the World Review was coming to an end, we were reinstated and asked to come to Baba's house. I am well aware that this scenario may seem odd or irrational to someone on the outside, but I believe that Baba used this kind of drama to make us realize that he expected great work from us, that we shouldn't get complacent or think that we knew everything or that we were exalted just because we were wearing orange robes. Another possible explanation for the World Review is that once again it was an opportunity for the disciples to be with the Guru. Had the World Review not been called, we would have not gone to India. Baba wanted to see us, and he wanted us to be with him. Thus, the World Review was, in a way, a convenient excuse. In any case, I remember the closing session of the World Review in which the General Secretary announced that the terrifying World Review is now over. The World Review was dramatic, but the drama didn't end for me and another monk, Dada Varananda. We still had to go over land from Calcutta to Dhaka in Bangladesh. It wasn't a long trip, but because we had come to India on such short notice and without proper visas, we had to somehow leave India without going through a normal border checkpoint. We went to a small village on the India-Bangladesh border. There, one Margi arranged for a boatman to take us across the river that separated the two countries. Somewhere around midnight, He took us across the fields to the riverbank, but we could not carry out the plan. The area was crawling with border police who were looking for some smugglers. When we saw the police, we ducked into the brush and waited. Though the police shined their searchlights all around and actually came quite close to us, they did not see us. We ended up hiding there for a long time. While we were waiting, we could hear the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra coming from a nearby village. It sounded like the whole village was out there chanting. When we could no longer hear any other activity in the area, we left our hiding place and walked to the riverbank, but there was no sign of the boat or the boatman. So we lifted our bags over our heads and waded out into the river. Fortunately, it was very shallow at that particular place, and we were able to traverse it without any great difficulty. Once we got on the other side, we were able to reach a place where there was bus service to Dhaka. Years later, in 2003, I was in the U.S. for the summer, and I met Dada Varananda again. He looked at me and said, "We have not seen each other since the time we crossed the river into Bangladesh." It was as if the incident in Bangladesh had just happened, and suddenly we were together again. Dada R has passed on since then, departing from this world. Who knows? Maybe one day I will see him again in another incarnation, and we will once more feel that the barriers of time and space have been traversed in a flash. Ooh, I just got tingles from that. Yes. Flooded in Tilijala. In September of 1986, I was in India representing Berlin sector in the monthly reporting sessions. There were a lot of Margis visiting India at that time, and there was a festive atmosphere in our ashram in Tilijala, making our stay quite enjoyable. In the meantime, it kept raining and raining. Soon the water was unable to drain away, and the ashram was covered with a foot of water. Despite this, our spirits were not dampened. We waded happily through the water to get from the main ashram building to Baba's residence, which was situated behind it. Still, the water kept rising. We saw people wading through the water with their clothes on their heads to keep them dry. The water kept on rising, and at one point, some devotees got into a small boat to cover the short distance to Baba's house. There were too many devotees in the boat, however, and it sunk. Still, everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. Gradually, however, the flood became a serious problem for the thousands of people who lived in the area surrounding our compound. We started to realize the seriousness of the problem when we ran out of food supplies and heard that Baba had started fasting in solidarity with suffering people all around us. Finally, the conditions became so bad that Baba had to be taken out of the compound in a small boat. I stood on top of the roof of the 5-story building and watched as Baba got into the boat surrounded by swimming yogis. The boat made its way from the Guru's residence through the compound's gate and into the street, which was now a waterway, not a road. Baba sat quietly in the boat while some monks paddled. The monks in the water were his honor guard. Baba's boat reached the higher ground of a nearby highway, and he climbed aboard a bus that carried him to a part of the city that was not flooded. The monks and nuns immediately formed a relief corps under the banner of the Ananda Marga Universal Relief Team and began helping the flooded residents, evacuating them by boat from their precarious residences and providing emergency food supplies. I met Dada Ramananda at the nearby highway where he was distributing food to a long line of waiting people, completely absorbed in his work. I asked him, "Dada, how are you going to do your meditation when you have so many people to look after?" "In this kind of situation," he replied, "I have only to close my eyes for a few seconds and I get tremendous concentration." The Mysteries of Microvita, Pizza, and Atlantis. During the month of January 1987, I was on tour in Italy. The milder weather there was a relief from the cold of Germany where I was working at that time. When it came time to do my late-night outdoor Kapalik meditation, it was actually a comfortable 19 degrees Celsius, 68 Fahrenheit, on the beach in Sicily where I was sitting. But it was not Italy's weather that stood out on the tour. Rather, it was finding out that Baba once again had introduced a new dimension to Ananda Marga philosophy. I received an envelope in the mail that contained copies of Baba's latest discourses. On the last day of 1986, he had given a talk entitled Microvitum, the mysterious emanation of cosmic factor. When I read the discourse, I was blown away. Baba boldly stated that life in this universe does not originate from combinations of carbon molecules, but rather depends on mysterious particles that he labeled microvitum, singular, and microvita, plural. He said that these particles are living, that they travel throughout the universe, that they straddle the line between mind and matter. In the Tantric philosophy, matter is said to be derived from mind, which then animates living structures. He went on to say that the understanding of microvita will help humanity to revolutionize science, particularly biology, chemistry, and physics. I wasn't expecting anything like this because the earlier books that I had read on Ananda Marga philosophy, describing a cosmic cycle in which pure consciousness is transformed into this material world and then evolves back into pure consciousness, seemed to be complete, explaining everything under the sun, from the origin of planets and stars to the creation and evolution of life. But I soon was to find out that this new concept of microvita could unlock even more mysteries, some of which were quite mundane and others out of this world. While I was in Bologna, I got into a friendly argument with one of the Margi brothers there. I asserted that the pizza in New York was the best in the world. New York pizza is held in high esteem by many people in the U.S., but my Italian friend took offense to this. After all, pizza was invented in Italy. I guess he had never heard of the pizzeria in Tampa that imports water from New York so that it can get the special something of New York pizza in its Florida-made product. My Italian friend didn't want to just argue about it. He made a direct challenge. He took me out to a pizzeria to prove his point. The restaurant was modern and well lit, but I was not going to prejudge the pizza based on the appearance of the restaurant. Back in the U.S., I had tasted great pizzas made in the most unlikely places. We ordered a big pizza and started eating. I was not impressed, but I didn't say anything. It was not a particularly good pizza. Midway through the meal, my friend said, "Okay, I concede, New York pizza is better." It is good that he gave up there and then, so that we didn't have to try to figure out how to get to New York for the second round of the competition. Only later, when I started to read more about microvita, could I understand why New York pizza is so prized that a pizzeria in Tampa went to the trouble of importing water from New York. Perhaps this new theory could explain why something prepared with exactly the same ingredients could produce a different taste in another place. In subsequent talks, Baba stated that the difference in the number and kinds of microvita that are contained in compounds can yield different outcomes. He gave the example of some munitions made from nitrates that turn out to be duds, while other munitions made with the same mineral compounds from another area have high explosive power. After reading this, I thought that perhaps the presence of some special microvita in New York's water was the reason why I won the Great Pizza Challenge in Bologna. As I read the discourse on microvita, I was also struck by what this new theory had to say about psychological and spiritual matters. In the psychic realm, positive microvita are said to help inspire people to do great things, while negative microvita can introduce destructive thoughts, leading to depression and suicide. Negative microvita can even have a collective impact on the whole society. Baba also said that depraved behavior attracts negative microvita. A few years later, I was present at a reporting session at Baba's Lake Gardens residence in Calcutta, in which he elaborated on the impact of microvita on society. He was in the midst of asking us questions on various spiritual and social topics when he asked, "Can anyone here, using the archaeology of Earth or of any other planet, give an example of the collective influence of negative microvita?" One Dada answered, "Yes, Baba. The city of Pompeii had a decadent lifestyle, and it was eventually destroyed by a volcano." Baba then addressed that same monk and said, "And what is your opinion about Atlantis?" The monk answered, "Atlantis had a civilization with developed science, and they were misusing that science. As a consequence, they were destroyed by a flood." Baba didn't say directly if the answers were right or wrong. Rather, he said, "It appears that this boy's guesses are correct." Birds for Baba. When we started bringing plants to India for Baba's garden program, someone joked that next Baba would have us bringing animals as well. After all, neo-humanism enjoins us to care for plants and animals and even inanimate objects. That joke turned into a reality when we received notice that we had to bring birds for aviaries that Baba was starting in Calcutta and Ananda Nagar. Whoever went to India for the monthly reporting sessions also had to bring a bird. It was challenging enough to bring plants, and sometimes great quantities of plants, to India, but bringing a bird seemed even more difficult. My turn to go to India came up again, and the bird program was in full swing. There was no way around it. I would have to buy a bird and take it with me on the flight to India and the long train ride to Calcutta. I went to a pet shop in Mainz and looked around until I selected a bird. I do not remember the exact species, but it was a bird that normally spent a lot of time hopping around on the ground in search of food. By nature, it was not a high flyer, but it would soon have to fly with me to India. I put it in a cardboard box about the size of a shoebox and poked some holes in the box so that it could breathe. It was not an ideal arrangement, but it was the best I could do. When I passed through security at Frankfurt Airport, the lady officer lifted the lid of my box and peeked in. She was charmed by the little bird and smiled. On the airplane, the bird sometimes jumped up and hit the top of the cardboard box, but she managed to make it through the long flight without any real problems. I flew into Delhi and then boarded a train for the long journey to Calcutta. The crowded train ride was uncomfortable for me, and I imagine it was equally uncomfortable for my bird, confined in her little box. However, the hardest part of the journey was yet to come. At the bustling Howrah train station in Calcutta, I met a bunch of orange-clad Anandamarga monks. We decided to take a taxi together to our ashram in Tiljala, which was then on the outskirts of metropolitan Calcutta. In India, it is not unusual to cram as many people as you can into a taxi. The Dadas, who were usually very thin and very poor, had an extraordinary capacity to pack themselves into a taxi. I used to wonder if they didn't use a special yoga mudra to accomplish the task. Our taxi, like the others at that time, was an old Ambassador. The Ambassador was manufactured by Hindustan Motors of India. It was based on a British car of the late 1950s, and Hindustan Motors continued to produce these cars with few improvements right up until 2014. Although the car was based on a 1950s model, to my eye it looked like something from the 1940s. 3 Dadas crammed into the front with the driver and the rest of us in the back. Our luggage was put in the trunk, but it couldn't close completely, so the driver tied a rope from the trunk handle to the bumper, which somehow secured it all. I was seated in the back with the box carrying my bird on my lap. Among the monks who shared the back seat with me was a Dada carrying a cage with 2 large green parrots. Leaving the train station, we crossed Howrah Bridge, Cantilever Bridge, with a suspended span over the Hooghly River. This is one of the busiest bridges in the world, carrying more than 100,000 vehicles per day and about 150,000 pedestrians. All manners of vehicles use the bridge, including large trucks and buses, as well as taxis, private cars, and even push carts stacked high with all kinds of goods, all of them constantly tooting their horns in the Indian fashion, sometimes passing vehicles by going into the lane of oncoming traffic with their horn going full blast, warning everyone to stay clear. The crowded bridge with its unrelenting cacophony really freaked out my little bird. She was hopping about in the cardboard box, hitting her head against the top. I glanced over at the monk carrying the bird cage with the 2 parrots. It was tilted because that was the only way we could fit in the back, and I was amazed to see the birds chatting away happily, fully at home in an overcrowded car on India's busiest bridge. Both my bird and I were happy when the taxi ride was over, and we reached our headquarters in Tiljala. I deposited the bird with the monk in charge of this program, and a few days later, I saw it in a large enclosure along with several other birds. Sometime later, these birds were joined by 2 ostriches that were specially flown in from South Africa. All right, I need a quick break. Don't go away, and I'll be back. Alexa, turn up your volume to 8. Jasper wants to say hello. Oh, and here comes Scuzzlebutt. Alexa, turn the volume down to 5. Taffy's saying hi to you, Jasper. Look at this big, majestic boy. Oh my goodness. Look at that face. Yeah, you're a good boy. Scuzzlebutt, come on up. There's my Scuzzlebutt. You want to say hi too? Here's Scuzzlebutt. Yeah, he's such a good boy. Mwah. Yeah, that's my baby boy. Yeah. Okay. You're right, Dada. He is quite talkative. You know, he's started to make a habit of this. When I'm live streaming, he just wants to come and get into everything. Like Saturday, I was reading a different book, and he just kept rustling papers the whole time, and we had to keep taking them from him. And then the other day when I was streaming music upstairs in my studio, he kept coming in, getting into everything that he could possibly find that could make noise. And I guess he's demanding attention, but holy cow. None of the other cats do that. He's still pretty kittenish, you know. You know how? Is a rainbow trout a good name for a baby girl? Huh? That's an odd question. It's a very odd question. I don't know. Maybe not. All right. Scuzzlebutt, you're so cute. Let's move this camera back a little bit. See if we can fit him in there. No, not really. Here, you want to come up on my lap? You're a good boy. All right, where were we? In case you're just joining us, here's what I am reading right now. Dada Veda's spiritual memoir. We are almost through with chapter 6. The Great Depression of 1990. In the late 1980s, the social philosophy of Ananda Marga was briefly thrust into the limelight due to the work of a Margi economist, Dr. Ravi Batra, whose book, The Great Depression of 1990, became a worldwide bestseller. My colleagues and I saw this as an opportunity to reach a wider public, so we started to organize activities publicizing the book and the ideas behind it. Dr. Batra, a professor of economics at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, argued that a study of the business cycle in the U.S. pointed to the possibility of a sharp downturn in the year 1990. He also said that just prior to the stock market crash of 1929, wealth had become highly concentrated in the U.S., and that now, in the late 1980s, the same levels of wealth concentration were being approached, a sign of a coming collapse. But what most intrigued me was when Batra, and Ananda Margi since his student days in India in the 1960s, elucidated his thesis by using Baba's concept of the social cycle. Batra said that the coming depression would not be just a typical economic downturn, but would be part of events that would usher in a new era for humanity. I received some of the early editions of the book, which Batra self-published, and I liked what I saw. Unlike most economists, Batra wrote in a lucid manner, and his points were easily understood. He also had a knack for public speaking, and his appearances on many radio talk shows enabled him to sell enough books to catch the interest of a major publisher, Simon & Schuster, which soon put out an edition that went to the number 2 position on the bestseller list. Because Batra mentioned P.R. Sarkar and the book Human Society Part 2, citing it as the source of his interest in the social cycle, we started to get attention from unforeseen places. One day, I was in our headquarters in Mainz when I learned that someone from the Embassy of Qatar had called up asking us to send them a copy of Human Society 2 as soon as possible. Back in 1971, I had displayed copies of Human Society 2 in our Santa Monica Jagrati. When my Acharya saw this, he said, "That's a very revolutionary book." His tone of voice suggested that he questioned the wisdom of displaying it so openly. "Don't worry, Dada," I replied. "Very few people will be able to get past the first 9 pages." Perhaps I should have said that very few people will get past the first sentence, which reads, "The existence of the relative factors of time, space, and person is substantiated in the field of cognition, and the cognizant bearing in its inertness is the highest stance of these factors." From there, Baba goes on to talk in an abstract fashion about the wave-like motion that is found both in nature and in the movement of society. Difficult or not, this book was now in demand, and we seized the opportunity. I was touring in France and Spain when I was dazzled by Ravi Batra's rise to fame. In Paris, my former LFT volunteer, Ramakrishna, who was now married, organized a public lecture in which I spoke about the social cycle and about Ravi Batra's book. This took place in the first week of September 1987. On September 17th, the stock market crashed, and it seemed like Ravi Batra's prediction was coming true. I later learned that in the U.S., Batra was so inundated with phone calls that he recorded a message on his answering machine that said, "This is not it." In Paris, we were not sure if this was the start of the Depression or not, but we did get excited. "Let's go to the university and talk with some economic professors," Ramakrishna said. We didn't know exactly what we were going to do, but we hurried to one of the University of Paris's campuses on the outskirts of the sprawling metropolis. Once we were there, Ramakrishna made a few inquiries, and before we knew it, we were thrust into a large classroom where an economics professor was giving a lecture. "We were just speaking about the Wall Street crash, and now you've come," he said to us. On the spot, he turned over the class of some 50 students to me, and there I was, giving a lecture about the social cycle with my rusty French that I had picked up a decade earlier. Rusty or not, they liked the presentation and wanted to know more about the social cycle and Prout. A few days later, I was walking on a Paris street when one of the people who had attended the lecture I had given at the beginning of the month came up to me and said, "You were right." For a while, we rode this wave of interest. "Jasper, come here, come here. Oh, here's Scuzz. Come on, Jasper, come on." For a while, we rode this wave of interest. In Western France, one of the Margis took me to a newspaper office in Rennes, where I was interviewed for an article that appeared shortly thereafter. I also visited a newspaper office in Valencia, where the interviewer took a keen interest in Batra's book and also in Prout. "How many Proutistas are there in Spain?" the journalist asked. Now I was on the spot. I think he believed that we had a huge movement in Spain at that time. In reality, we only had a handful of people, but I did not want to disappoint him, so I lifted my hands and arms and spread them out, suggesting a large and wide following while remaining deliberately vague. Some years later, Ananda Marga was battered by anti-sect articles in newspapers across Europe. These articles were usually instigated by various churches that did not want young people to join new religious movements. Sure enough, a newspaper in Valencia wrote a scathing article attacking Ananda Marga, warning the public that they had discovered 5 followers in Valencia. The Great Depression did not come in 1990, but for a moment at least, our ideas were being discussed on big public stage. Later in India, I learned that Baba had said, "The cosmic magician is behind the success of Ravi Batra." When I met Ravi in Finland, where he was promoting an edition of his book in Finnish, I told him what Baba had said, and he lit up with a big smile. New Renaissance magazine in print and online. Wherever I went in my travels with Ananda Marga, I always started some kind of newsletter or other printed journal. In my first assignment in Los Angeles, it was a newsletter that grew into the Sadvipra newspaper, which later became the Universal Times. When I went to France, I edited a newsletter that was translated by my helpers and published in French. In Hong Kong, I made a small newsletter from the PCAP, the Ecological Department of Ananda Marga. Later on, I also edited and published the newsletter for Ananda Marga in the Far East. You could say that by this time, writing and editing was in my blood. It was something I would do wherever you put me. Yogis would explain it by saying that it was my samskara, the result of my past karma, which created a momentum that needed to be fulfilled in this way. This was my way of spending my time, and in Europe I was again destined to get engaged in a major publishing effort. During the 1980s, my supervisor in Europe was Dada Shambhushivananda. Dada had a PhD in economics and had been a college professor before becoming an acharya of Ananda Marga. He encouraged me to make a small newsletter for the intellectual branch of Ananda Marga, which is known as Renaissance Universal, or RU. When I was publishing Sadvipra and the Universal Times in the U.S., some of my Margi friends published the Renaissance Universal Journal, a magazine on intellectual topics. Similarly, during the early 1980s, Margis in England published a full-fledged magazine called New Renaissance. That magazine had been discontinued, so Dada suggested that I continue the tradition and call my journal New Renaissance. And there's a picture. During the mid-1980s, I published a few issues of New Renaissance, but it was a photocopied newsletter produced in limited quantities. It was not a printed magazine like the ones in the US and UK, so I really did not consider it to be the real thing. However, sometime around 1988, we installed a small printing press in our main office. By this time, we were also using computers with the early versions of desktop publishing programs. In my days, editing Sadvipra on the Universal Times, we had to do everything by hand. It was hard work. Now, the tedious layout process could be done with a computer and a laser printer. The new programs produced columns with proportional type fonts, allowing us to do the whole layout on the computer screen. The laser printed pages were then photographed and turned into plates, or alternatively, the computer discs were given to the printers, who made plates directly from the digital information on the discs. In December of 1989, the same month that the Berlin Wall began to come down, we produced our first copy of the revived New Renaissance. It was printed on our small printing press and sent throughout Europe and to other parts of the world as well. The magazine contained articles on ecology, politics, science, spirituality, and culture. There were books and music reviews as well. Although the new computer programs made it easier to produce a magazine than it was in the days of cutting and pasting physical type rolls, it was by no means easy. There was also a long learning curve getting used to the computer. Sometime in the early 1990s, we were laying out an issue of New Renaissance. I was working with Dada Arjuna, my artistic layout guy. We had been working for several hours and had completed laying out around 20 pages of a 36-page magazine. All of a sudden, the computer screen went black. Arjuna had accidentally disconnected the plug when his stretched foot under the desk hit the power cord. When the power was restored, we found that we had lost those 20 pages, having forgotten to save them as we went along. Computer composition meant that we could do more elaborate types of magazine design, but in the end it seemed like we spent the same amount of time as we had when we had done the work by hand. It was still laborious. While the first issues of the magazine were printed on our own press, as our activities in Poland increased, we found that we could take our computer discs to a printer in Poland and publish the magazine there. The printers in Poland provided us with full-color covers in a more professional format than was possible on our press, so I started taking the files to Poland. Later in the month, I would return to pick up the magazines and bring them back to Germany, where we would send them out to subscribers around the world. Since the magazine was in English, I paid special attention to its distribution in England and often went there to promote it. Several bookshops in London used to sell the magazine, and we had a subscription drive in the UK with inserts and advertisements in magazines such as The Ecologist and Resurgence. Despite all these efforts, however, we were never able to reach a large audience. We did not have the budget to do the advertising needed to increase our circulation significantly. And being based in Germany when our biggest potential markets were in the UK and the US only compounded the problem. Technology came to our rescue around 1995. Arun, a Margi from Finland, approached me at the summer retreat in Germany. He had a digital camera and offered to take photos of the covers and put the magazine on the internet. By this time, I had used email and had a vague idea of the internet, though I had never used a browser to surf websites. I gave Arun some back issues along with the files for the latest issue, and an internet version of the magazine appeared on the web in late 1995. In the months that followed, I became an avid internet surfer and began to help edit the online edition as well as the printed edition. I published all the articles from the back issues online, and in the years to come, our website located at www.ru.org began to attract a relatively large volume of internet visitors. When we had a printed journal, we were only able to print and distribute around 1,000 to 1,500 copies 4 times a year. This meant that at most 18,000 people per year had contact with our magazine. 4 issues times 1,500 copies times 3 readers per copy equals 18,000. And that 18,000 figure is generous because many copies of the magazine were not distributed properly. Today, due to the power of the internet, New Renaissance magazine gets more than 10,000 visitors every month. I continued editing the magazine until 1998. Some of the highlights included interviews with economic activist David Korten and with Donovan, the singer-songwriter from the hippie era. In 1998, I went to my next assignment in the Middle East and the Balkans. My colleague and friend, Dada Veda, continued publishing the print version of New Renaissance till 2005. Today, like many formerly printed journals, it continues only as an internet publication. And that concludes chapter 6. Now, chapter 7 isn't very long, so I think we are going to go ahead and do chapter 7 today. I think he's watching the birdies, Julie. Jasper, you watching the birds? Are there some good birdies out there? Yeah. Maybe the same kind that Dada Veda took to India. Baba moves on, chapter 7. Holy cow, you interviewed and spoke with Donovan. That is so cool. I was just a few feet from him at a little hole in the wall in Ann Arbor, Michigan in 1989. So I guess I kind of met him too. So cool. 1989. Yeah. Is that when you interviewed him? When you interviewed and spoke with him? That was 1989, wasn't it? Or 1988? Around the same time. What a small world. 98. Oh, later. 1998. So cool. All right, chapter 7, Baba moves on. During the latter part of the 1980s, I was able to go to India every year because I was a department secretary. And once a year, each department secretary had to go to India to take part in one of the monthly reporting sessions with Baba. My final visit of the decade was in October 1989. During that year, Baba put a lot of emphasis on the Master Unit program. Master Unit is the name that Baba gave to the rural social service and education centers that Ananda Marga was setting up around the world. They were conceived as central hubs designed to invigorate the economy and culture of the surrounding region. The first Master Unit was Ananda Nagar in West Bengal. When Ananda Nagar was first established, the adjacent village, Pundag, was a sleepy hamlet on the railroad line. Today it is a bustling town with all kinds of economic activities. Ananda Nagar, which was once a treeless desert, is now a verdant campus with educational institutions ranging from preschools to a degree college. During the October 1989 reporting sessions, Baba spoke about master units. In the concluding meeting, just before the representatives returned to their respective sectors, he said with great solemnity, "These master units will become cultural centers, places from where we can popularize our ideology." Those were the last words that I was to hear from Baba. I was not able to go to India for reporting the following year because Baba called the directors of the various master units. They became the representatives for their respective sectors instead of the department secretaries. Poland Master Unit. Jasper! Jasper! Back in Europe, we also caught the Master Unit bug. Oh, thanks, Carrie. Alexa, turn the music to 4. The meowing is pretty darn loud too, and I just don't even know what I can do about that. Jasper Doodle, kitty kitty kitty. Poland Master Unit. Back in Europe, we also caught the Master Unit bug. We tried to buy land in several different countries, including Poland. While I was on tour in Poland in 1990, one of my supervisors, Dada Arta called me on the phone and said that we should find some land there that we could develop into a master unit. I was in the southwest of the country at that time, visiting Margis. We looked in the immediate area and did in fact find a piece of land with a small farmhouse. I called Dada and told him we had found some land for the master unit, but when I told him how small it was, he said that we should continue looking, giving preference to the areas near the German border. I went with Rameshwar to several places, but we couldn't find anything that seemed suitable. I felt defeated by the circumstances, but just at that moment, as we were seated in Rameshwar's house in Chajnau, in the Silesian region of southwest Poland, a Margi stopped by to tell us that he knew of an 80-hectare farm that someone was selling, more than large enough for a master unit. It was located only 20 minutes away from the city of Jelenia Gora. We went there immediately. Turned out to be 32 hectares, not 80, but it was bigger than anything we had seen up until that point. Not only was it big, it was beautiful. A dairy farm nestled in a valley overlooked by Mount Śnieżko, or Śnieżka in Polish, which means snow-capped, exactly what the mountain is. The location was beautiful, and it had land that could be cultivated as well as used as pasture land. The present owner was not a typical farmer, but a city dweller who had gone back to the land to farm. He had contracted cancer and could not work the land anymore, thus he had put it up for sale. And here's a picture of a scene at the master unit in Poland. Our land is in the foreground. Mount Śnieżka is the highest peak on the ridge with a small structure barely visible at the top. I sat with Rameshwar and Mahavira, and as we talked to the man, I wondered whether we could handle such a huge responsibility. But we went ahead and told him we would purchase it. This was in the spring of 1990, and Poland had just been liberated from communist rule. Land prices were low compared to Western Europe, much lower than they are today in Poland. The price was low, but to a monk it seemed like a lot. I had Margie friends in Norway, Sweden, Germany, Italy, and other countries of Western Europe. With their generous donations, we were able to make the down payment. We got an old farmhouse on 30 hectares, 1 Russian tractor, and 17 cows for less than $20,000. But I was unable to raise all the money we needed. $3,000 still remained to be paid, and I was not sure how I would get it. I told the farmer that I would pay the remainder later in the summer after I returned from an ecological festival in Hungary, but I had no real idea how I would raise the money, since the festival would only be attended by young people and hippies. I put the problem in the back of my mind and went to Ecotopia, a camping festival organized by a Holland-based organization called European Youth Forest Action. They held the festival each summer in a different location. Now that the Iron Curtain had fallen, they seized on the opportunity to hold their festival in Hungary. During the festival, there were workshops on sustainability, agriculture, spirituality, and other themes. I gave a meditation workshop, but my problem of returning to Poland with the necessary payment did not go away. On the last day of the festival, I attended a workshop on project development and fundraising. The leader of the workshop, Wam Kot from the Netherlands, asked each participant to explain his or her project. I explained that we had just purchased a farm in Poland, but needed a bit more to make the final payment, which was actually to cover the cost of the tractor and the cows. When the workshop was over, Wam Kot approached me and said, "A lot of Polish people came to this festival, and they paid us in Polish money. We can't use it in Holland, and we have a whole pile of it." He counted out the money. It was exactly the amount I needed to make the final payment. "I can give this money to you as a loan," he said, "and you can send me reports on the progress of the project and pay us back gradually." I signed a contract and took the bag of Polish money back to Poland and paid the farmer. I had been bluffing when I had told him earlier in the summer that I would return with more money, but I took it as just one more of the little miracles that are part of the work of spreading spirituality around the world. Visit to the Baltic states and the Soviet Union. In Eastern Europe, 1990 was a big year. The year started not in January, but in December of 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell. In subsequent months, the seemingly formidable communist governments of Eastern Europe started to crumble. We Ananda Margis were not only spectators, but participants in this process. As early as 1967, in his book Human Society Part 2, Baba observed that in places where communism had supplanted capitalism, the first indications of the Vipra age of intellectuals, are beginning to emerge. In that same book, he noted that the Hungarian Revolt of 1956 was not a counter-revolution, as the Soviets asserted at the time, but a revolt of the intellectuals against a military-dominated system that had failed because factors relating to time, place, and person could not be prepared properly. Now, in early months of 1990, the factors conducive to change in Europe seemed to be more favorable. My supervisor, Dada Veda, was invited to Lithuania, where he spoke in the parliamentary session at which Lithuania proclaimed its independence from the Soviet Union. The members of this independence movement fit Baba's description exactly. They were intellectuals, and their leader and the eventual first president of an independent Lithuania was Vytautas Landsbergis, a music professor. Following Dada's first visit to Lithuania, he was invited to speak at the Second International Conference on Human Rights to be held in Vilnius, Lithuania's capital, in September 1990. Lithuania had not yet managed to become truly independent, and the government in Moscow did everything they could to disrupt the coming conference. Dada and many other would-be speakers could not obtain visas to enter the Soviet Union, of which Lithuania was still a member. Also, the Soviets would not allow the conference to take place in Lithuania. The conference organizers managed to shift the venue to Leningrad. When Dada S. found out that his visa had been denied, he asked me if I would speak at the conference in his place. What should I speak about? I asked. He replied that I should base my talk on the Neo-Magna Carta, which Baba had written about in 1986. Baba said that framers of constitutions should guarantee 4 basic rights: spiritual practice or dharma, cultural legacy, education, and indigenous linguistic expression. I prepared a talk based on these points and was eager to attend the conference. I was not blacklisted in the Soviet Union, so I was able to obtain a visa. By this time, our missionaries had visited all of the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and Russia as well. We had an active unit in Leningrad, where the conference was going to take place. To make the most of the visit, I scheduled stops in Latvia and Lithuania, where we also had meditation units, and in Estonia, where I was to be received by an ecological activist whom I had met at the Ecotopia conference in Hungary. In Lithuania, I was received by Margis at the Vilnius train station. Lithuania looked somewhat like neighboring Poland. It had a mixture of beautiful old buildings and cobblestone streets, along with the large block-like and rather unattractive high-rise tenements found all over the communist countries of Europe. We had a pleasant group meditation and dinner in a home in the country outside Vilnius. The next stop on the trip was Riga, the capital of Latvia. Once again, I was greeted by Margis at the train station and taken to one of their homes, where we enjoyed meditation along with a tasty vegetarian meal. While in the car with one of my hosts, I made a faux pas when I said, "This is my first time in the Soviet Union." My Margi host was hurt because I mentioned the Soviet Union and not Latvia, but then conceded, "Yes, we are not free yet." Latvia reminded me of Lithuania and Poland, but the next city I visited surprised me. Tallinn, the capital of Estonia, offered a bright mixture of well-preserved old buildings dating back to the Middle Ages and modern Scandinavian architecture. Located on the Gulf of Finland, the city enjoyed a stream of tourists and regular trade with Sweden and Finland. Even though it was part of the Soviet Union, it had a prosperous look that I hadn't seen in the other Eastern European cities that I had previously visited. I was met there by ecological activists who were trying to start a green political and social movement. My ecological friends were more interested in the environment than in meditation, but they did gather together some friends who listened as I spoke about the role that spirituality and yoga could play in the environmental movement. Following my quick stops in the Baltic countries, I got on the train to Leningrad. Since 1977, I had been traveling by train all over Europe, and I thought that I knew my way around. However, when I reached the Leningrad station, I became disoriented. The layout of the tracks and entrance areas was different than what I was used to. I couldn't see any people waiting for passengers, which made me wonder whether the Margis would come and pick me up. I only had a piece of paper with a single telephone number, and when I didn't see anyone waiting, I tried to call the number from a payphone near the train tracks. The coin went into the phone, but somehow it didn't work. I was wondering what to do next, but I didn't have to wonder long because a Margi showed up and took me to his house. He was able to recognize me by my long beard and hair. The next day, I attended the first session of the Conference on Human Rights. The conference in Leningrad was a follow-up to a previous conference held in Krakow. That conference, which attracted 1,000 participants, had been organized by members of the Solidarity Human Rights Commission and Polish Peace and Freedom Movement. The conference in Leningrad had the blessings of the city council and was organized by an amalgam of Soviet and Polish dissidents. I went there dressed in my full orange uniform and listened to the opening speeches. I was a bit shocked by the boldness and vehemence of the speakers, who, among other things, decried the jailing of dissidents in psychiatric prisons in the Soviet Union. Although Dada S. had been invited to the conference, our place in the program had not yet been finalized. I had to scurry around, but I finally got a chance to speak. I was introduced by an American MC who thought that I was a delegate from India. My talk was simultaneously translated into several languages, and when I mentioned that new constitutions should guarantee the right to indigenous linguistic expression, I got a round of enthusiastic applause. On the final morning of the conference, a delegation of 6 U.S. senators strode down the aisle of the main auditorium. Clad in crisp, bluish suits, they were an impressive-looking bunch. 5 of them sat down in the same row where I was sitting, one of them right next to me. On the stage, their representative, Senator Alphonse D'Amato of New York, spoke on and on about human rights in Kosovo, a Yugoslavian province that I had not yet heard of, but would visit some 10 years later. When the conference ended, my Margi host took me around Leningrad. They showed me a number of buildings with murals of socialist realist art. In the murals, Lenin was pictured as a saint with smiling children all around him. We were told that he was such a good man and that he never told a lie, one of the Margies sheepishly said. I didn't tell him that we were also told the same thing about George Washington. Back at the house of the Margies, I began my work as a meditation teacher. At that time, Leningrad was our most active center in Russia, and 15 young men lined up to learn meditation from me. It takes anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour to teach the Ananda Marga meditation lesson to a beginner, but early on in my work, I learned how to streamline the process. Whenever I have a large group of people, I gather them together and explain preliminaries to them collectively. Then I call them in one by one to learn the details that are personal to them. Instead of spending 15 hours with this particular group of people, I was able to impart the lessons in a much shorter time. I had one last stop on my tour, and that was Moscow. During my childhood, Moscow was the capital of our mortal enemy, the seat of the evil empire. Now, after seeing the spirited dissidents at the Human Rights Conference, it seemed like this empire was no longer so menacing. But still I was wary. A few years earlier, one of our nuns traveled in plain clothes from Japan to Eastern Russia to teach meditation to interested youth. She was accosted and detained by the KGB, who wanted her to become their agent and spy on Japan. She was released and got back to Japan safely, but the incident was on my mind as I and an accompanying Margi traveled on a night train to Moscow. Our group in Moscow was smaller and less active than in Leningrad, but we enjoyed meditating together and shared a meal after meditation. I also got a chance to visit the city and even walked in Red Square. During the Cold War, I had read that the Soviets took the possibility of nuclear war quite seriously and were much better prepared to protect their civilian population than we were in the U.S. This was confirmed by my trip in the Moscow subway. Escalators took us deeper and deeper to the train platforms. The depth of the subway was much greater than I had seen in the U.S. or in other parts of Europe, no doubt built as a way of providing shelter from an attack on the city. Following the short stay in Moscow, I took a train back to West Germany. If Dada S. had not asked me to attend the conference in his place, I would not have had the chance to get a glimpse of the last days of the Soviet Union. Baba's passing. When I was in India in September 1989, I thought that eventually I would have another chance to see Baba in India, but I was wrong. In Ananda Marga, circles there was a prevalent belief that Baba would remain in his physical body until 2005. I thought that eventually I would have... The origin of this belief was a story told by one of the early Ananda Marga disciples. He said that he was with Baba in 1955, just after Ananda Marga had been founded, and Baba went into a very high state of consciousness and said that he would leave his body then and there. The disciple begged Baba to remain in his physical body and complete the work of establishing the social and spiritual ideals of Ananda Marga. This disciple asked Baba to stay for 50 more years, and finally, after a lot of pleading, Baba relented and said that he would stay. This incident is described in detail in the Jamalpur years. Everyone in Ananda Marga had heard versions of this story, and most of us believed that Baba would be with us for at least 15 more years. Even when Baba developed a heart condition and had 2 heart attacks, we still were not worried and went on with our work with business as usual. On October 21st, 1990, I was in a meeting with monks and nuns in Germany when we got the news that Baba had passed away. This was astonishing to me because I really believed that Baba would be around till 2005. When I heard this news, it felt like the lights had been turned off in the room. My world turned to black. We cut short our meeting, and I went back to our headquarters in Mainz. We learned that a funeral would be held on October 26th, and I wanted to go to India to attend it. I called some Margis, and they helped me to purchase a ticket to India. A few days later, I arrived at our headquarters in Tiljala, which was filled with Margis from around the world. Baba's body was on display in a room in his residence adjacent to the headquarters building. Margis silently filed into the room and paid their last respects. The grief in the compound was extremely heavy. People were bursting into tears on and off. Baba's body lay in state from October 21st to October 26th. On October 26th, a cremation ceremony took place. A large platform shaped in the form of the 6-pointed star, known as Bhairavi Chakra in yoga circles, but exactly the same as the Star of David, was constructed in the center of the Ananda Marga compound in Tiljala. Pallbearers carried Baba's body to the center of this platform where a large pyre of wood had been constructed. Baba was placed on the pyre and it was ignited. More than 5,000 Margis crowded around, filling every spare inch of the walled compound. We watched the fire burn for many hours, wondering what would happen next. During this time, I looked up in the sky and saw a flock of birds fly in formation over the pyre. In one coordinated motion, they dipped down toward the pyre, performing a salute to Baba. The Indian newspapers covered Baba's passing, and some reporters speculated that there would be a power struggle in the organization following the Guru's departure. I scoffed at this, and in the immediate aftermath, nothing happened. One of the senior monks, Acharya Sharadananda of Aduda, was unanimously accepted as the head of the organization. I went back to Germany and continued with my work, grief-stricken, wondering why the prophecy had seemingly failed. But as I heard more accounts of Baba's last days and reflected on Baba's life, I came to understand that there was nothing amiss. Certainly Baba would have had to leave this world one day or another, whether it was 1990 or 2005. Regardless of the date, we would have had to go on with our mission. And that is the end of chapter 7. I'm just going to look to see what we have left here. Two more chapters. Now, here's the thing. Next Tuesday, I'm only going to be able to read for about an hour because I have a memorial service to go to out of town. So, what I'm thinking is it'll probably be two more reading sessions to finish this book. I'll probably just read chapter 8. I'll try to read all of chapter 8 next week. Looks like it's got a bunch of pictures, so I think I will probably be able to read chapter 8 next week in an hour, and then the following week we'll finish it up. Now, if you have missed any of the reading of this book, you can find it on my YouTube channel, and I'll drop that link right now. There it is. There is a playlist called From Brooklyn to Benares and Back. So get all caught up and join me next week for chapter 8. And I see Julie is redeeming a couple of raffle tickets for the surprise Squishmallow raffle. Dada Veda says chapters 8 and 9 discuss his music. I cannot wait. Hope y'all are enjoying this book as much as I am. All right, Julie. 2 tickets today. I'm just going to wait and take a screenshot when you're all done. Is it just the 2? Or are you redeeming more? Jasper, kitty, come here. You want to say bye? You want to say bye to everybody? Come on. You little cutie cat. Oh, you're so cute. Okay, come here. Here's Jasper to say goodbye. Did you have fun? All right, just the 2 tickets for Julie then. Screenshot that. And when I'm up in my studio next, I will put those tickets in the fishbowl for you, Julie. Thank you all for listening today. Hope you enjoyed yourself as much as I did. So my next stream will be Free for All Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss out. Peace out, Pride-a-Doodles.